Next, I would like to introduce our final panel discussion today. Is your company developing an inclusive culture? So instead of looking for a culture fit in new employees, how can companies make their workplace better suited to diversity? Today, we're going to dive into the key elements that make an employer welcoming to a diverse labor pool. This panel will be moderated by journalist Zoraida Sambolin. As the longtime morning anchor for NBC News affiliate WMAQ, she became an iconic figure in Chicagoland. Her career also included serving as co-anchor of CNN's morning show Early Start. So please help me welcome Zoraida and her expert speakers right now.
Hello there. How is everyone? Nice and satisfied? How was lunch? I thought it was really great. I walked in just in time for lunch. That is my typical MO. Feed me and I'm happy. I'm thrilled to be here with you today. When they said that, or asked me if I would participate, and I knew that it was DE&I, I thought, I need to do this. It's kind of in my wheelhouse right now, and I'm in learning mode. I hope you are in learning mode. I suspect you are. So let's get to know our panelists. They're going to self-introduce.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Wood, and I am the Vice President of Social Impact for Best Buy. And we're based in Minneapolis, but all over the country with our social impact programs. I've been there for about 10 years.
Hello, everyone. I'm Pam Pujo, the Diversity Advocate and Consultant for Affirmity. I live in Dallas, Texas, where it's sunny and 70 degrees. So not quite so enjoying the Chicago weather, but glad to be here with everyone. Affirmity is a company that focuses on DEI solutions with software, diversity metrics, benchmarking, and ERG management.
Good afternoon. I'm Melina Barona with a B as in boy, not as a C as in what we are not speaking of potentially these days. I am part of the leadership of our diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging at Conagra Brands. We have about 130 food brands. So folks know Swiss Miss or Healthy Choice or Duncan Hines, a little more than they maybe know Conagra Brands. I was part of the Great Resignation, or what we're calling the Great Rethink, in the last year. So I joined Conagra in 2021 and come from, though, about 20 plus years in diversity, equity, and belonging. It's a career passion. And I'm from Chicago, so weather is just a mix of what it's, but I always say I'm from the souther side, meaning South America. So I'm Colombian American. I'm thrilled to be here.
Good afternoon, D.L. Morris. I'm a commercial litigation partner at Hinshaw Culbertson, a law firm based here in Chicago. I also serve as our diversity, equity, inclusion partner and servicing our culture initiatives across the country. I've been in that role for about 5 years, practicing law for about 14, and really thrilled to be among so many other folks in industry sectors who care about making an impact in the communities that we live and work.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Natasha Miller-Williams. I'm the head of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Ferrara. If you don't know Ferrara, you might recognize our brands Now and Later, Sweet Tarts, Laffy Taffy, all those brands that you know and love that you grew up with. We're headquartered here in Chicago, and I'm a lifelong Chicagoan, but I'm complaining about the weather as well. So thrilled to be here.
Amen. I think we all share that, right? It's about time that it gets a little warmer around here. So you know how when we all try to get to know each other a little bit better, we share something a little personal. Yeah. So I think I'm going to start with DL. So DL may break out and dance.
Don't overpromise. Don't overpromise.
I don't know. So he's a yoga devotee, but he also sits on a board of the Joffrey Ballet. And so I was hoping, DL, that at the end of all of this, maybe some sun salutations or something?
During the reception, after a few drinks, please feel free.
And we have an actress amongst us. I'm going to let her self-identify.
It is me. I am that person. I am a Chicago-based improviser and performer, and part of the work that I do and that I'm passionate about really extends throughout my life and day to day. And I think that's true for most of us, that our work lives are not compartmentalized. So I've been part of really the improvisation community in Chicago, and I am a founding member of Las Tinas, which is a Chicago-based telenovela troupe that we improvise.
Somebody's laughing. Somebody's
telenovelas,
seen this.
very dramatic. We were slapping before it was cool or uncool. I'm not sure how it is this week, but always fake. And we improvise them in English, though.
I was
so
wondering when somebody was
inclusive.
going to mention that famous slap.
Oh,
So thank you for getting it out of the way.
Fine.
All right, and then we have somebody who, when I saw on her Twitter handle, hashtag hustle and heart, I identified. So Pam, can you tell me a little bit about NFT artist? Because that sent me down this rabbit hole.
For those who are familiar with cryptocurrency, that's kind of like the new wave, the NFT art. When you see that people are making millions of dollars, I was like, well, let me get a little creative to try to make some of this money. So I love creating, being creative, writing, artwork. So it's digital artwork if you're not familiar with NFTs. You can look me up on Twitter, Pujo 1970, and it's Pujo spelled like the car, not like my name.
All right, and Natasha Miller-Williams. So Ferrara candy is what got me. It was like, do you guys eat candy in your office environment on a daily basis? No, I'm serious.
There's a thing called the Ferrara 15, so you got to be careful when you do it.
Oh, okay. I was just curious as to whether you have it around all the time. And you have a TEDx talk coming up.
I do, yeah. It's about challenging systems that try to block our success, so I'm excited about that.
Okay, and then we have somebody here who does something really great for teenagers that really spoke to my heart. Can you talk to us a little about that? I know we're going to probably discuss it today in our conversations, but that's a very giving moment.
Yeah, so Best Buy, we have a program called Best Buy Teen Tech Centers, and they are state-of-the-art after-school tech spaces for youth, middle school, high school, and a little bit beyond that. We used to have one in Chicago, it closed, but we're going to open another one here. We have 44 open across the country, and they're really meant to be places where youth can get excited about 3D design and music production and coding and it's all sorts of tech. And so we're really excited about it, and now we're starting to think of it as a talent pipeline for Best Buy as well, which I'll talk a little bit about.
Yeah, if you look up Andrea online, you will see that she talks about this all the time with a great deal of passion. So I know it's a big source of pride. All right, Pamela, I'm going to start with you. Your company, in particular, has been working on increasing diversity and equity in the workforce for an incredibly long time. So what are some of the greatest challenges you think companies still face?
And that's a good question. It seems like in this industry, we're always starting over. We've been having these moments that move into movements, and DEI always jumps to the front of the forefront for a lot of companies. You know, they start hiring, talking about new initiatives, but the greatest challenge that we see with a lot of companies is they don't know where to start or how to start implementing a DEI program. They just want to jump in and do something. We hear a lot of people say we need to do training, and the first question is, why are you doing training? They'd say unconscious bias training. Well, because everybody is. But we need to step back and take a look, does that work for your organization? So one of the greatest things that we see is a lot of companies don't know how to capture the data that will help them, guide them in the right direction as to what type of DEI program they need to put in place. So they're like, what should we measure? How should we measure? How do we measure inclusion? How do we capture all of these demographics? So we know how to look at race and gender, but what about veteran status and LGBTQ? So that's where we come in, helping companies look at ways that they can capture this information. It may be through assessments, it may be through employee engagement surveys, and then taking that collective information and helping them create a strategy that they can implement, serving as like their roadmap for the next 3 to 5 years, so that you're not just jumping in and doing something that could really have even a more negative impact than what you intended.
DL tracking, let's talk about tracking, measuring success. How does your company do that?
The legal industry, thankfully, has had a lot of momentum. I agree with Pamela that there's been a lot of back and forth. I think that's just the nature of trying to move on culture initiatives. You have great momentum forward. There's always a backlash. But I would say some of our guiding light, if you will, has been joining the Mansfield certification that's offered through Diversity Lab. And it basically requests companies that sign on to this certification process to agree to consider at least a 30% threshold of diverse talent when it comes to promotions, recruiting, as well as marketing efforts. That threshold has been something that our company has been really happy to exceed, not just hit as a minimum standard. And when you couple the initiatives that we have under Mansfield, as well as some other public survey tracking information, survey reporting that we do for our clients, as well as we do in other law firm industry spheres, it helps us really get a barometer of where we're going and how we're tracking. And we're seeing the success through just continuing to infuse the culture of DEI in our common language and integration across the firm. And I say it starts from the top down and bottom up. It's not just relying on your senior management to really move that initiative, but it is getting a collective sense of collaboration and grassroots efforts from so many of your staff, employees, attorneys, at every level who care about these sorts of initiatives. We've seen our management committee, the two highest governing bodies of our firm, grow to a 50% representation of diverse talent over the last 5 years. And we're continuing to try and see continued growth in our promotions as well as our recruiting and onboarding processes. So again, I just would underscore, having that baseline is important from a public accountability standpoint. But then it does take the collective effort, if you will, from everyone really pushing the culture that we want to see from the top down.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I see you nodding. I was just about to say.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, because I wanted to just say, we're on the complete opposite end of, where you are, because Ferrara is so early in our journey. We just started two years ago. And so I know often people will say, let's check all these different boxes, let's do some training, and I'm the first person in this role. And it's well, training on what? We really need to have an inventory of exactly where we are as an organization. And so we did some very basic things, and a lot of it I feel a bit like a broken record because there's been so much rich content today on taking the time to listen to people and to survey your employees and really know what is essential to prioritize that's unique for your organization, because Ferrara is very different from your firm, is very different from your organization, is very different from all of the organizations that are represented here. So just knowing what is unique for your organization, you can go Google 5 things to jumpstart a DEI initiative, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be successful for your organization. And so I just wanted to pile that on to what both of you all were saying.
So, DL, you mentioned the word happy, that everybody was happy to do this. And in my personal experience, that hasn't always been the case. Not everybody's happy at the top, not everybody's happy at the bottom. So this question goes out to you all, is how do you deal with that?
I'm happy to take the first stab at it. I think you have to build relationship. One of our 3 goals is developing our attorneys to be the best in their practice, civic and community engagement, partnering with organizations like From Day One to do this sort of activities. But relationship building is so key, and I think a lot of our other panels have said the same thing. Developing a layer of trust is a foundation to really advancement on these issues. I say folks don't have to agree with everything that we're doing, but you have to be committed to grow, even if you don't know the components, and you have to be committed to have those uncomfortable conversations. Just to pivot quickly, everybody knows the Oscar situation that happened over the weekend, and so Monday morning, all throughout the day, there's all sorts of office memes, et cetera. And so I just politely raised the fact that, we have to be sensitive to some of the other cultural dynamics that are also at issue in that exchange. And I had several people reach out to me and say, what, I'm really glad you said that. I didn't mean any offense by ABC, but, they wouldn't have come if they didn't feel comfortable having that conversation. And so I think if you're cultivating a culture in your organizations where people can be their authentic and true selves, they can admit where they don't get things right, where they don't, I don't agree with those microaggressions that you put up on the screen that said such and such and such, because I say that all the time, then I think you're able to really facilitate the overall growth that you want to see.
I think that's probably one of the most complicated things to do, though, isn't it? In order to be able to have people feel that it's a safe environment to do that without any repercussions. So I guess, Andrea, I'm going to toss that in your direction because you do have a very diverse group of kids that you deal with. Your company is a very large company with a lot of diverse employees. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in a kind of a unique position in that we are based in Minneapolis, and so George Floyd happened right in front of us, right? And so at the time, our CEO came out, just like probably all the CEOs who you work for, with a very pointed statement, which is, we will do better. But she followed that with the we will do better with, and here are our commitments, and here's what we're doing. And we did make we call them our bold commitments, and it's a combination of social impact, what we're doing with youth from disinvested communities, but what we're doing in terms of recruitment, retention of diverse employees, what we're doing to help promote and retain. And so those bold commitments really required us, I think, to think in a new way, because it wasn't just me running social impact and saying, okay, you go ahead and do that community stuff. No, you have to work really closely with our inclusion and diversity team, with our HR team, with our procurement, looking at business investments. So it really is a company-wide effort. I think when you get the CEO saying, this is my expectation, we will do better, this is my expectation, here are our commitments, and by the way, we report on those commitments on a quarterly basis, so we didn't just put them out there and say, okay, we're working on those. We have to report back to the executives and to some external stakeholders around the progress we're making. So I think that is the piece that not everyone was, I wouldn't say happy, but I think everybody's on board, understanding that this is near and dear to our CEO's heart and to our executives.
So if we were to develop a successful DEI initiative, and we're at different stages, right? How do you start? What would that look like? And you can all chime in and add something to it, but if we were working on a strategic plan, saying, okay, company XYZ, just fill, and I know that you have to know your employees and who you're serving and all of that, but if you're starting at a foundation, what do you think? What are the key elements to having a successful strategy?
It's been said multiple times throughout the day, but everything runs empty without leadership alignment and leadership accountability, because there's role modeling that starts with your leadership being on board. So I think that's fundamental. And then actually being able to come back and saying, like, how are we holding our leaders accountable? And how do we trickle that down throughout the entire organization? So to me, that's table stakes. Isn't there? I can keep going, but if anyone wants to add on top of that, or I'll keep going.
No, I totally agree. We always have to have the stakeholders in place, identify those key stakeholders at every part of the business.
Yeah.
And also, like Andrea said, it's incorporated across different business lines.
Exactly.
So you want to have everyone at the table, C-suite, middle managers, all the way down to employees, so that everyone understands what's going on and everyone can be held accountable, not just leaders, but employees as well. And that should always be incorporated within your strategy.
And if you have a distributed workforce like we do, being in manufacturing, the needs of the business vary because we have corporate employees, but the majority of our workforce is actually in the production facilities. And so when you think about the needs or what inclusion or what equity may look like for our facilities versus our corporate employees, that's very different. So just being able to define how we have an equitable organization for these two very different, unique groups in our organization, to me, that would be a part of, like, what does success look like, because it won't be the same. We have hourly employees in our plants. We don't in corporate. So just understanding the differences, not just across department, but, for a distributed organization as well.
So the one thing that's happened a lot, and I think for all of us, is that we've felt a lot. When we watch the television, when we see everything that's happening in the world around us, we feel. And so I'm curious, how in your companies do you make employees feel like they belong, like this is an inclusive culture? Do you have some tangible examples of that?
because I feel like happiness and belonging are those great byproducts of when we're really intentional about getting diversity, equity, and inclusion right. And then when we get those very, very right, and it feels so, so amazing to get them right, it feels excruciating to not. From a lived experience personally, and then from a cultural experience, it feels excruciating. So being able to have those cultures of belonging, it's truly my job within Conagra to think about that. And tying this back a little bit to earlier on the metrics, because Pam, you mentioned that a lot of times companies don't know what to measure or how, and something that seems so ethereal like belonging, it's like, but there are ways to really measure this in a way that makes it meaningful and tangible at the leadership level, where we know that leadership and that tone at the top matters. And what we're kind of learning at Conagra, although we're a well-established, decades-deep consumer packaged goods food company, we are still early-ish in continuing to develop, and developing being that verb, that action verb of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. We have all these metrics, though. But that's what I came to learn in joining Conagra. We have these metrics, we have these data points. We don't have them all. They were being captured in our Pulse survey data. There's an intense amount of really wonderful, rich people culture information that we hadn't yet mined and gone into. So it was there for us to utilize, and we have begun that exploration of the data that exists before us while continuing to capture that. What we learned through the Pulse survey data as we tagged it and tied it up and ticked and tied it up to different themes is that we needed to start over-indexing on genuine listening, which is one of our inclusive behaviors. We have rolled out a series of inclusive behaviors that are not rocket science. They are not at all. They are ones that our leaders are committed to, and they formally described them and took time within the organization at a town hall and at a follow-up kickoff for our diversity and inclusion learning journey to talk about those inclusive behaviors. So over-indexing on genuine listening, because we knew in cultures of belonging that listening is so foundational, so fundamental to communication. And then the other inclusive behavior that we have committed to over-indexing on in the early stages of this learning journey is healthy debate. Because as we know, we've seen the toxic side of it, right? And toxic positivity can be part of the problem, too, within that healthy debate. But we also have formally taught, as we really think about and defining inclusive behaviors and what healthy debate means at Conagra, that folks maybe were confusing that with lived experiences are up for debate. So we carved out like, no, we're successful in being innovative in our product lines because we think those through and we debate them, and we're collectively decisive about amazing decisions. Your lived experience, my lived experience, is not up for debate. We honor those. And so if DL comes out of a meeting, I know we're not imagining, comes out of a meeting and says, Melina, I don't feel so great about that. I'm not going to take any energy to say, oh, I felt great, again, toxic positivity. I'm going to just say, thank you for sharing that with me, or we're meeting with that team next week. Are there things that are helpful to share? And if he says, I just thought you'd be a good listener, I needed to get that off my shoulders, then I'm just going to, again, do that genuine listening. And if he says, yes, actually you were the one talking over me, can you support me more next meeting? So those are a few things that we are over-indexing on to really help with, we hope, belonging.
Does anybody?
Because you talked about behavior, you prompted a thought in me that I would actually love for you all to just tell me what you think. And I'm always of two minds with this about how people feel. And I'm not trying to be controversial in any way, because I actually want people to feel differently. But I separate feelings from behavior, and you were talking about behavior. And so Ferrara has a value of empathy. And so it's all about we want people to appreciate each other's perspectives, and it really does lean into kind of the feelings aspect of it. But then also, because I've been on this DEI journey, we've been talking about journeys today for a while, I wrestle sometimes with how people feel and how much I even care about what they feel, as long as they change their behavior.
Thank you for saying that.
especially-
Yeah.
Especially when we're talking about like managers, and I'm like, as long as you like change your behavior in this workplace towards where we need to go, how you feel matters less to me. I just like would love for you all to just share your thoughts, and do you see them as the same or different, and what are your thoughts?
I mean, I would just add a little bit to what Melina was saying. It's policy and practice. You know, you can pass as many initiatives as you want, but if your leadership, if your core employees don't buy in, then all you have are just talking points that sound great on a brochure, right? And so, you know, even as basic as pausing to ask for feedback, receiving that feedback in a non-judgmental and a very validating way is the practice on how you implement what your policies are, right? That's showing empathy. It's the same thing in, you know, a legal environment. It's like, how do you give feedback? You know, we were all subjected to this Zoom dynamic where it was so transactional. Everything was, I'm only going to talk to you if I need something from you. I'm going to send you an email or I'll Zoom bomb you. But like, how do you go the step beyond that, right? I'm sorry, how many of you have been Zoom bombed? Maybe even during this meeting. But to go beyond that, to give constructive feedback so that you're not just returning a report to somebody with all this red line on it, but you actually spend some time to say, this is what I was looking for, this is where you were close to that, this is where I'd like to see improvement. That policy and practice is, I think, how you help create that feeling of belonging, that people can take confidence in their work, feel validated in however they feel, and be able to really show up.
You know, and I know you all were talking this morning about remote and hybrid work. We are in a new phase. I think that everybody going remote for 2 years, for many of us anyway, it was the great equalizer, right? Because no one's in the office and has those interactions with, you know, maybe with leaders and others. You know, it is very transactional, right? So what's interesting about it, I think now, is that people are, as we're doing this, we're going back hybrid in a couple weeks, but we still have lots of 100% remote employees. How do you be intentional about that, right? Because naturally now you're going to have folks who are interacting in the office, and people are going to be left out. The other thing I want to say about belonging is that it has to be on our minds every single day. And I have a wonderful leader on my team who was traveling with some other leaders on my team recently, and talked to me about the fact that she felt left out because, and I don't think it was intentional, but there were all these text chains going back and forth about, oh, what about dinner? What about dinner? And you know, certain people weren't part of the conversation, right? So belonging can be as simple as, hey, if we're going to dinner, let's invite everyone, right? And let's make sure everyone understands that they're invited. And so I think there is something to be said for being really thoughtful about it all the time, because you might not be thinking that, oh, just because I didn't call you out in the text, that of course you're invited to dinner, but what does that person think? And being remote or being hybrid makes it really hard.
I love that we're talking about feelings, because how often do you get to do that, right? Where everybody's so corporate and there are all these rules and regulations and the way you have to behave, and we have left feelings and empathy and all of that out of it, and maybe that's why we are right now, perhaps. So there was another area that really interested, I'm not quite sure whose bio this was in, but when we talk about diversity, you know, I see color right away. It is the first thing that I think of, but there's so much different diversity that we could focus on, and one of the areas was neurodiverse populations, people with disabilities, how to make them feel like they belong more. And I actually had to go look it up because I was like, wow, what are some neurodiverse populations? And ADD, ADHD popped up right away. And I have a kid with ADD, and I have to love him because I'm his mother. But oh my gosh, I just thought one day you're gonna have a hard time at work, dude, because the way you think is so complex. And I learned in reading this that those words that I used were inappropriate, right? What he has a value, he has something that he adds, it just doesn't jive with me all the time, and I have to learn how to figure it out. And so to me, it's a daunting task just as a mother, as a company, to try to also celebrate the differences and honor them. Is there a way that you do that too? Because this umbrella seems to be so big. DL, you are,
Well, we just had a speaker come in. Her name was Haley Moss. She's out of Florida, but she presented on neurodiversity as part of our continuing legal education initiatives. And she's autistic. And I think it's just destigmatizing. As much as you can raise the level of conversation on these topics and encouraging folks to, again, we all care about, you know you're going to perform best when you feel most comfortable showing up to work, right? And so the more you can destigmatize these sorts of things that have traditionally been so hush-hush, you know, and create a conversation around it in a positive and affirming way, then I think you're going to see more people identifying. I mean, you get a lot of people who don't want to identify because of the fear of how they're going to be perceived. But I mean, it's just debilitating when, you know, you're yelling at them, just, why can't you get this? Or why can't you pick up or respond fast enough? But I think the more we create opportunities for people to understand and normalize these sorts of other aspects of diversity, then I think the more received it's going to be in our workplaces. And hopefully there's a lot of opportunity for others like your son, as well as so many others.
yeah, to actually speak up and say, look, this is why I'm doing this. Because if they feel the empathy, right, if they know that you're going to treat them with love and respect, which I think is, you know, the big thing that we're talking about here today. We always talk about what works. Is there anything in your experience where you say, oh, that doesn't work? And I know I'm throwing that at you out of left field, but it's one of those things that sometimes, you know, when somebody says to you, hey, you should try this, and you're like, oh, no, I'm not trying that because I know that doesn't work. So I'm just curious if you've had any learning experiences where you have said, yeah, no, that's not going to work. Don't do that.
You asking?
I'm asking any one of you. But I am looking at you, Dia.
You know, I'll just share a moment of transparency because it's a safe space, right?
Yes, it is.
We passed this initiative called the Black Attorneys Matter Referendum out of a byproduct of everybody's reaction to Floyd. And part of that process was this Voices series where we had so many of our leadership and members of the firm kind of discuss where they were on the spectrum of realizing these sorts of racial exchanges that happen. And as amazing as it was for some members of our population, it was also very traumatic for others of our population. That frustration, that disappointment of like, oh my God, you're in this position of leadership and you still don't get it. It's 2020, it's 2021. And I think, we ended up bringing a woman, her name is Cecilia Loving out of New York. She did a racial inclusion circle with our Black Attorney Affinity Network as well as our senior leadership. And it provided an opportunity for people to like kind of take a step back and just share their stories, share where they are on the journey. And I think the personalization for our leadership to see, these aren't just like platitudes and stuff that you say, but this is stuff that affects people, who's their lived experience. I think it was incredibly life-changing and hopefully a great learning moment for our leadership. And also, it wasn't as, the initial step wasn't as successful as we wanted, but I think it did provide a level of affirmation for our Black attorneys as well to be able to have that space to share with senior leadership.
I can add to that.
Sure.
Just you prompted a thought for me that something that I think a lot of companies learn doesn't work or just isn't necessary following the events of 2020 and 2021 is just making statements after every single event. Initially, I know it was viewed as an act of solidarity, but if you don't have a real action plan or you don't already currently have an action in place, it's not necessary, and it's viewed as a platitude by your own employees or by the very community that you're trying to stand with. And so I think that was a lesson for a lot of corporations over the past couple of years. Just do the work in support of the groups that you're trying to stand with.
Anyone? Yep.
Yeah, and I think the other piece from a community engagement perspective, one thing I realized as we were going out and starting these programs, and we view ourselves as partners, not just funders of these programs, that my team that was doing this work was not reflecting the communities we were trying to serve. And so we're very intentional about hiring, recruiting and hiring to make sure that that wasn't going to continue to be the case. And I can tell you now that we have folks on our team who, can relate to the communities we're serving in a completely different way than I, as a white woman with power and funding, can, we actually have a much better partnership because our community partners, I think, feel like they can be honest with us and tell us what's not working or where they need help. where, if I walk in the door, everybody's got their guard up, right? And I try to say, hey, I'm just a person, but you come with your, all your stuff. So I think, being really intentional about who you're talking to and who's building those relationships is really important.
So I'm going to keep you on the spot here for a minute, because I am a Latina woman, and so when we're having these conversations, I feel very comfortable engaging. How do you feel? You just mentioned that sometimes when you walk into a room,
Yep.
how does that make you feel?
I try to be really aware of the power that I bring with me, and to take a step back. So as an example, if we're going to visit a teen tech center in a primarily Black neighborhood, and I have folks on my team who are Black, I try not to be leading the conversation, to take a step back, let them have the conversation. I'll add value when I can. I try to be, I'm saying I try because I don't always do this well. I'm always learning. I try not to let my ego get in the way and not try to be the important person, but to just let the conversations be natural and flowing. And if I don't need to be a part of it, it's okay. It's not about me. It's about how do we build the best partnership. I'm not always great at it. Sometimes I screw up, but being aware of it, I think, helps.
Thank you. Pamela, I think we're running out of time here, so I want to spend a little time with you. Since you're a consultant and you have gone to a lot of companies, I know you haven't been with with Affirmity for that long, but when you do go into these companies and you're dissecting them, trying to figure out what's working, what's not working, do you have any experiences of things that just don't work?
I say sometimes what we see that don't work, it kind of goes back to what Andrea said. We have people in positions where they don't have the diversity. It could be looking at from like recruiting, for example. You're going to maybe a historically Black college or university or a Latin-speaking university, and you don't bring individuals who look like the people who you're trying to recruit. Oftentimes, I know just from personal experience, if I've gone to those type of events and I don't see anyone who looks like me, who I can relate to, then I'm not interested in that company. So I think a lot of companies overlook that fact when they are recruiting, trying to bring in diverse talent, not having visible diversity to help attract that talent. And then also not having visible diversity within roles that can retain that talent. We see a lot of not much diversity at the very leadership level, high-level leadership areas. And if someone doesn't see someone like them in those roles that they can aspire to, who they can reach out to, then more than likely they're not going to stay. So oftentimes we don't think about diversifying within our organizations to bring in that diversity and to keep that diversity. And it's not just from race or gender, but also, as we spoke earlier, neurodiversity. Do you have other people? Do you have programs? Do you have jobs that I can see myself doing in that role?
There are so many communities that fall into that word diversity. I mean, I just think it's kind of endless. So we have a minute 32 left and counting down. Are there any final thoughts that you all have that you would like to leave our audience with? And Natasha, I'm going to start with you.
The only thing I would say is that there's a role that we can all play. You may sit in an official role as a DEI practitioner, or you may be in a business or a commercial function, but there's a role that we can all play, and it starts with listening. I know that was the title of this actual conference, so just taking the time to listen to each other is a great place to start.
I would just say quickly, it gets discouraging in these positions because you always feel like you're going against the grain sometimes, but look at this room.
Yeah.
This is the collective momentum of progress. Be proud of that and continue the mission.
I know that many of us are familiar with the concept of allyship, consider ourselves allies, and I would love to continue that conversation and also twist it a little to the let's become accomplices too. And I love that. I've really taken on that, put on whatever gear I need and be an accomplice to anti-racism, to feminism, to really ensuring that we have true cultures of belonging.
And I would say it's a journey. A lot of us have been on this journey for quite some time. It's not a quick fix, it's not a check the box, but it's a journey that's about being respectful to other people and bringing them along with us.
And I would say, just to add to what I was just talking about, be aware of who's in the room, who's in the conversation, and then who's not in the conversation, and ask yourself, are you getting the truth? Or are you getting something else because you don't have the right people?
I think that's great. A lot of these lessons I feel that most of our parents taught us when we were little, and that we just kind of forgot and lost our way. And so maybe we could refine that way and make this a better place. The last thing I'm going to leave you with, because I have been knee-deep in research, is the census, the U.S. Census. And I'm not even talking about, how we are as a global community, but we are changing in some really profound ways. And so we are all going to be people of color. And that is a reality, and that is happening much sooner than later. And so I say let's embrace it, because that is who we all are. I thank you all very much. I thank my esteemed panel. You guys are rock stars. Andrea, Pamela, Melina, DL, Natasha, experts in your field. Thank you for doing the hard work that you do and for teaching us how to walk that walk as well. Thank you.